Sometimes, the greatest acts of love begin with a single moment of compassion. Lord Alric had learned to live with loneliness, believing that grief was the price of caring too deeply for another soul. When his guards found a starving peasant girl collapsed at his castle gates, he expected to offer her a meal and send her on her way. But Lira was different. She had gentle hands that could heal the sick and a quiet strength that reminded him what it felt like to hope again. As she tended to his people and spoke her mind with unusual courage, something awakened in his heart that he thought had died with his wife. The castle began to feel like a home instead of a tomb. When he decided to make her his Duchess, the kingdom was shocked. But what happens when two wounded souls discover that true nobility comes from the courage to love again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Darnhelm Castle like memories that refused to fade. Lord Alric stood at his tower window, watching the sun struggle through the gray clouds that seemed perpetually drawn to this remote corner of the kingdom. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had learned that duty could sustain where joy had failed. His dark hair showed the first threads of silver at the temples, not from age, but from the weight of sorrows that had settled into his bones like winter-cold dawn below in the courtyard. His people went about their morning tasks with the steady rhythm of those who understood their place in the world. Darnhelm might sit at the kingdom's forgotten edge, but it was well tended, its walls strong, its granaries full. Alric took pride in that, even if the pride felt hollow these days. He had inherited more than stone and mortar from his father. He had inherited the responsibility to protect and provide, and he would not fail in that duty, regardless of what his heart did or did not feel. "My lord?" Sir Marcus knocked softly at the chamber door. The graying night had served 3 generations of Darnhelm lords, and his weathered face bore the lines of a man who had seen both triumph and tragedy. "The morning reports, if you please." Alric turned from the window, noting how the light seemed dimmer inside these walls. Everything felt dimmer since Lira died. "Come in, Marcus. What news from the village?" "Old Henrik's roof needs mending before the next storm, and young Willem reports tracks near the eastern border wolves, most likely driven down by hunger." Marcus set a stack of parchments on the oak table that dominated the chamber. "The harvest stores remain good, but if this winter proves as harsh as the signs suggest, we may need to ration grain come spring." Alric nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of a letter bearing the royal seal. These communications from court came less frequently now, as if the kingdom itself had begun to forget that Darnhelm existed. Perhaps that was for the best. The politics and pageantry that once seemed important felt like elaborate games played by children. Real life was here, in the daily care of his people, in the practical decisions that meant the difference between comfort and suffering when the snows came. "Has Father Benedict finished his rounds in the village?" Alric asked, settling into the chair that had once been his father's. The leather was cracked now, worn smooth by generations of lords who had sat here making decisions that rippled out into the lives of those they protected. "Aye, my lord." He reports the usual complaints about the cold, worries about the approaching winter, and Mrs. Aldred is convinced her youngest has caught something serious, though the good father suspects it's merely a child's attempt to avoid his chores. A ghost of a smile touched Alric's lips. Mrs. Aldred had been convinced each of her 7 children was dying of plague at least once during their growing years. Yet all had survived to robust adulthood. "An old man? How fares our kitchen?" She grumbles about the quality of the latest flour delivery, but her bread remains the finest in 3 counties. She asks if you'll be taking your meals in the hall again, or... Marcus hesitated, his diplomatic nature warring with his genuine concern for his lord's well-being. "Or will I continue taking them alone in my chambers like a hermit?" Alric finished. The knight's discretion was appreciated, but unnecessary. Alric knew exactly what kind of lord he had become since Alara's death. Functional, responsible, but hollow as an empty suit of armor. "Tell Nan I'll join the evening meal in the hall. It's been too long since I've shared conversation with our people." Marcus's relief was evident. "Very good, my lord. They miss your presence." After the knight departed, Alric remained at his desk, staring at the reports without truly seeing them. The faded tapestry on the opposite wall drew his eyes. It always did. A wedding gift from Alara's father, depicting a spring meadow full of wildflowers. She had insisted on hanging it where the morning light would catch it, claiming it would remind them both that winter always gave way to warmth eventually. 5 years had passed since she died, bringing their child into the world. And still the tapestry hung there, its colors gradually fading like his memories of her laughter. He should take it down, perhaps, replace it with something more fitting for a man who had learned to live with solitude. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. It was the last brightness in a room that had grown steadily grayer, and perhaps some part of him still hoped she had been right about winter giving way to spring. The castle around him had adapted to his grief, becoming a place of quiet efficiency rather than warmth. The servants went about their duties with competence but little joy, and guests were rare. Lord Blackwood of the Southern Holdings had visited twice in recent years, each time with subtle suggestions that Alric should consider remarriage for the good of his lands. Lord Garrett of Millhaven had extended similar hints before his own family was lost to the border conflicts that seemed to flare and die like embers in the kingdom's outer reaches. Alric understood their reasoning. A lord without an heir was a dangerous thing, a holding that might fall into dispute upon his death. But the practical matter of marriage felt as cold as the stones beneath his feet. How could he promise love and devotion when his heart felt like an unused room shut up and gathering dust? The sound of boots in the corridor outside drew him from these familiar melancholy thoughts. Heavy steps, urgent but controlled, one of his guards bringing news that required immediate attention. Alric straightened in his chair, setting aside personal concerns for the more pressing matters of lordship. "Enter," he called, and watched as Magnus, one of his younger guardsmen, appeared in the doorway. The man's cheeks were red with cold and exertion, his breath visible in small puffs that spoke of a hard ride through the morning chill. "My lord, forgive the intrusion, but we found someone at the gates." A woman, collapsed in the snow. "She lives, but barely." Magnus paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase his next words. "She appears to be a peasant, my lord, but she carries herself with there's something different about her." Alric was already rising, his sense of duty overriding any questions about the woman's station or circumstances. "Is she injured? Beyond exhaustion and cold?" "No obvious wounds, my lord, but she's been without food for some time, and the fever burns in her. Willem and I brought her to the kitchens, thinking old Nan might—" "You did right." Alric was already moving toward the door, his earlier melancholy forgotten in the face of immediate need. "Have Nan prepare broth and warm blankets. I'll see to her myself." As he strode through the corridors that had echoed with emptiness only moments before, Alric felt something stir that he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond mere duty, as if the castle itself was holding its breath in anticipation of change. He told himself it was simple Christian charity, the obligation any lord owed to those who sought shelter at his gates. But deep in his chest, something that had been sleeping began to wake, like the first stirring of life beneath winter snow. The morning light seemed a little brighter as he made his way toward the kitchens, and for the first time in years, Lord Alric of Darnhelm walked with something approaching eagerness in his step. The woman lay unconscious on the rough wooden table in old Nan's kitchen, her breathing shallow and labored. Steam rose from the basin of warm water beside her as Nan gently cleaned the dirt and frost from pale features that spoke of both hardship and inner strength. Even in unconsciousness, there was something resolute about her face, as if she had made peace with whatever fate awaited her. "Poor lamb," Nan murmured, her weathered hands surprisingly gentle as she worked. "Skin and bones she is. Been walking for days, I'd wager, maybe weeks." She looked up as Alric entered, noting the unusual concern in his expression. In 5 years of service since his wife's death, she had never seen him personally tend to a stranger. Alric approached the table, studying the woman's face with an attention that surprised even himself. She appeared to be perhaps 25, with auburn hair that caught the firelight like autumn leaves. Her clothes, though travel-worn and patched, had been made with care, the kind of careful mending that spoke of poverty faced with dignity rather than despair. "What do you make of her condition?" he asked, reaching out instinctively to check the fever burning in her cheek before catching himself. It had been years since he had touched another person with such tenderness. "Exhaustion, hunger, and cold. 3 horsemen of the road," Nan replied, spooning warm broth between the woman's lips. "But she's strong, this one. Her body wants to fight, wants to live. See here?" She lifted the woman's hand, showing calluses and small scars. "These are working hands, but gentle ones too. Healer's hands, if I don't miss my guess." As if summoned by their conversation, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Alric found himself leaning closer, drawn by an anticipation he couldn't name. When her eyes finally opened, he was struck by their color, a deep green like forest shadows, filled with intelligence and wariness in equal measure. "Where?" she began, her voice hoarse from fever and exposure. "You're safe," Alric said quickly, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You're in Darnhelm Castle. I am Lord Alric. My guards found you collapsed at our gates." The woman tried to sit up, but weakness overcame her, and she fell back against the rough pillow Nan had provided. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, taking in the stone walls, the hanging herbs, the warmth of the great hearth. "I sought only shelter from the storm," she whispered. "I can pay." "There will be no talk of payment," Alric interrupted, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "You're ill and far from home. Rest is what you need, not worry about coin." Something flickered in her green eyes, surprise, perhaps, or relief. "You are kind, my lord. I am called Lira." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I was traveling to the southern villages, seeking work as a healer when the snows came early." "A healer?" Nan looked up with interest. "Well now, that explains the hands. We could use such skills here, couldn't we, my lord?" Young Timothy's cough has been troubling him for weeks, and old Henrik's joints pain him something fierce in this weather. Alric noticed how Lyra's face brightened at the mention of those who needed help, despite her own obvious weakness. "You would tend to strangers even in your condition?" "Healing is not work, my lord, it is calling." Lyra's voice grew stronger as she spoke of her craft. "My grandmother taught me the old ways, the herbs and remedies that ease suffering. If I can be of service to repay your kindness, your recovery is payment enough," Alric said. But even as he spoke, he found himself curious about this woman who thought first of others' needs, even while fighting fever. "Tell me, what villages were you traveling from?" "The roads have been dangerous of late." A shadow crossed Lyra's features, and she was quiet for so long that Alric wondered if the fever had claimed her consciousness again. When she spoke, her voice held a grief that resonated deep in his chest. "My home is gone, my lord. The border conflict soldiers came in the night. My family." She stopped, her hand moving instinctively to something at her throat. Alric noticed she wore a simple wooden cross on a leather cord, the only ornament visible on her plain dress. "I am alone now, save for what skills my hands. Remember, The weight of her words settled over the warm kitchen like a cold draft. Alric understood that kind of loss, the way it could hollow out a person's world and leave them walking through life like a ghost. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his own, a gesture of comfort that surprised them both. "You are not alone here," he said quietly. "Rest now. Heal. There will be time for talk of the future when you're stronger." Over. The next 3 days, Lira drifted in and out of fevered sleep while her body fought to recover from weeks of hardship. Alric found himself checking on her condition more often than strictly necessary, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the way she had spoken of healing as a calling rather than mere work, or the quiet dignity with which she bore her losses. When consciousness returned to her fully, she proved to be exactly what Nan had predicted: a skilled healer, with gentle hands and vast knowledge of herbal remedies. Even weak as she was, she insisted on examining young Timothy's persistent cough and mixing a tisane that eased his breathing within hours. "How did you know to combine those particular herbs?" Alric asked, watching her work with ingredients from old Nan's well-stocked pantry. "My grandmother's teaching," Lira replied, grinding dried leaves with practiced efficiency. "She said the old knowledge lives in the plants themselves. We need only listen carefully to hear what they offer." She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to see more than most. "You have been very kind to a stranger, my lord. It speaks well of your character. Any decent person would have done the same, would they?" Lyra's smile held gentle skepticism. "In my experience, kindness is rarer than we might hope, especially from those with power over others' fates." Something in her tone suggested she spoke from hard-won experience, and Alric found himself wondering what other sorrows lay behind her calm exterior. "You speak as one who has seen the worst of humanity." "And the best," she replied, returning to her work. "The two often exist side by side, sometimes within the same person. It is one of the mysteries of this world." That evening, as Alric sat in his chambers reviewing the day's reports, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the woman recovering in the room below. There was something about her quality of quiet strength that reminded him of bedrock beneath shifting soil. She had lost everything, yet still thought first of healing others. She had been shown kindness and received it with grace rather than grasping need. For the first time in 5 years, Lord Alric of Darnhelm fell asleep thinking not of the past shadows, but of someone very much alive in his present dot. By the end of her first week at Darnhelm, Lira had quietly revolutionized the castle's approach to health and healing. What had begun as simple gratitude for shelter had blossomed into something approaching a calling. She moved through the corridors with increasing confidence, a leather satchel of herbs and remedies always at her side, ready to tend anyone who needed her care. Young Timothy, whose cough had plagued him for months, now ran through the stables with clear lungs and bright eyes. The tisane Lira had prepared worked better than anything the traveling physicians had offered, and word of her skill spread quickly through the castle's close-knit community. "She has a gift, the one does," old Nan confided to Alric as they watched. Lira tended to a kitchen maid's burned hand. "Not just with the herbs, mind you, but with people. She really listens when they speak of their troubles." Alric had noticed this himself. Where other healers he had known focused solely on symptoms and remedies, Lira seemed to understand that healing often began with being truly seen and heard. She sat with old Henrik while treating his aching joints, listening patiently to his stories of better days. She laughed with the serving girls while checking their minor ailments, treating them not as inferiors, but as people worthy of her full attention. "Lord Alric," she called to him one morning as he crossed the courtyard, "might I speak with you about young Willem?" He had been on his way to review the watchtower repairs with Sir Marcus, but something in her tone made him pause. "What concerns you? It's not urgent, but I've noticed he favors his left shoulder when he thinks no one is watching." An old injury, perhaps, that never healed properly? She fell into step beside him as they walked, her presence somehow making the familiar stones of his home seem brighter. With your permission, I'd like to examine it properly. Untreated injuries can cause trouble in later years. You have my permission to tend anyone in the castle who needs your help, Alric replied, then found himself asking, how do you notice such things? Most would see only a guard doing his duty. Lira's smile was gentle but serious. My grandmother taught me that every person carries their history in how they move, how they hold themselves. Pain leaves marks that go deeper than the body. She glanced at him meaningfully. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that don't show. There was something in her eyes that suggested she saw more than he was comfortable with, as if she had looked past his careful composure to the grief he thought he had hidden so well, instead of the irritation he might have expected to feel. At such perception, he found himself curious about her insight. And what do you see when you look at me? He asked, surprising himself with the question. She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes thoughtful. I see a man who has forgotten what it feels like to hope, she said quietly, but also one who still chooses kindness despite his pain. That tells me the wound, however deep, has not poisoned the heart. Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. That evening, as he sat at the high table in the great hall, a practice he had resumed at Sir Marcus's gentle insistence, he found himself watching Lira move among his people. She had been given a place at one of the lower tables, but somehow she had become a center of warmth and laughter wherever she sat. She was speaking with Father Benedict about some herbal remedy, her face animated with the joy of sharing knowledge. The elderly priest, usually reserved in his manner, was leaning forward with obvious interest, occasionally nodding or asking questions that drew more detailed explanations. The lass has brought life back to these halls, Sir Marcus observed, following Auric's gaze. Haven't seen the people so easy in their spirit since. He caught himself, but Alric knew what he had been about to say. Since before Lady Lira died. She has a natural way with people, Alric agreed carefully. Aye, but it's more than that. The graying knight took a thoughtful sip of his ale. She sees the good in folk, brings it out somehow, makes them remember what it feels like to matter. Later that evening, Alric found himself walking the castle's battlements as he often did when sleep proved elusive. The stone walls that had once felt like a prison now seemed more like protective arms, sheltering something precious that was slowly growing within their embrace. Below in the courtyard, he could see lamplight glowing in the windows of the rooms, where his people slept peacefully, and the sight filled him with a satisfaction that went beyond mere duty. My lord? Lyra's voice came from the shadowed archway behind him. Forgive me, I saw you from my window and thought, are you well? I am, he replied, and realized with some surprise that it was true. I often walk here in the evenings. The quiet helps me think. She moved to stand beside him at the wall, wrapping a heavy cloak around her shoulders against the night's chill. For a time they stood in comfortable silence, looking out over the village lights that dotted the darkness like fallen stars. It's beautiful here, she said eventually. Peaceful. I can understand why you find it soothing. It wasn't always so peaceful for me, Alric admitted, the words coming easier than he had expected. After my wife died, these walls felt more like a tomb than a home. I told myself I was doing my duty, caring for my people, but truly I was just existing. Lira turned to look at him, her expression gentle but attentive. And now, he paused, searching for the right words. Now I remember that duty and joy need not be strangers to each other. My people are not just responsibilities to be managed, but individuals with their own hopes and fears and dreams. I had forgotten that, I think. It's easy to forget such things when we're hurting, Lira said softly. Pain narrows our vision, makes us see only the immediate need to survive each day. But healing, true healing, means learning to see the world in its full colors again. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of loss and recovery, of the small moments that made life worth living despite its sorrows. Alric found himself speaking of Lira for the first time in years without feeling the crushing weight of grief. And Lira spoke of her grandmother's wisdom and the family she had loved and lost. When they finally parted ways, Alric realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. The lonely lord who had rescued a dying peasant woman was slowly becoming someone new. Someone who dared to hope that the best chapters of his life might still lie ahead. The letter arrived on a gray morning in late autumn, bearing the elaborate seal of Lord Cedric of Westmark. Sir Marcus delivered it to Auric's study with the careful expression of a man bringing unwelcome news. "From Lord Cedric, my lord. His messenger waits below for your reply." Alric broke the wax seal with growing unease. Cedric was known throughout the region for his political ambitions and his talent for discovering information that others preferred to keep private. The contents of the letter confirmed his worst suspicions, that my dear Lord Alric. The missive began in Cedric's flowing script. "Word has reached me of interesting changes at Darnhelm. It is said that you have taken a common peasant woman into your household and show her unusual favor. While I am certain these rumors are exaggerated, as gossip so often is, I thought it prudent to offer counsel from one who has your best interests at heart." The letter went on to remind Alric of his duties as a lord, the importance of maintaining proper social boundaries, and the necessity of considering marriage alliances that would strengthen his political position. It concluded with an invitation to visit Westmark, bringing his guest, so that Cedric might judge the situation for himself. "Pompous fool," Alric muttered, but beneath his irritation lay a deeper concern. If Cedric had heard rumors, others would have as well. The delicate peace he had built at Darnhelm might be threatened by the very happiness he had begun to rediscover. "My lord?" Sir Marcus ventured carefully. "Shall I tell the messenger you require time to consider your response? Tell him I thank Lord Cedric for his concern, but require no counsel on managing my own household." Alric set the letter aside with more force than necessary. "And Marcus, what exactly are the servants saying about Lady Lira's presence here?" The knight's weathered face showed his discomfort with the question. "Nothing improper, my lord, I assure you. They speak only of her kindness and skill as a healer." But he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They do speak of how she has brightened your spirits, how the castle feels more alive with her." Here, such observations, innocent as they may be, can easily be twisted by those with ill intent. That evening, Alric found Lira in the castle's herb garden, carefully harvesting the last of the season's useful plants before the coming frost could claim them. She worked with practiced efficiency, her movements graceful despite the humble nature of her task. Watching her, he felt again that stirring of something he had thought dead, not just attraction, though that was certainly present, but a deeper recognition of compatibility and shared purpose. "Lord Cedric of Westmark has written to me," he said without preamble as he joined her among the dying plants, Lyra's hands stilled on the stems she was cutting. "And what does Lord Cedric have to say about the peasant woman who has overstayed? Her welcome?" Her perceptiveness no longer surprised him, though it continued to impress him. "He suggests that my kindness may be misinterpreted by others, and that I should be more mindful of appearances." "He is not wrong," Lira said quietly, resuming her work with hands that trembled slightly. "I have been thinking the same thing myself. My presence here, while comfortable for me, may cause difficulties for you that you do not deserve." "And what conclusion have you reached?" She was quiet for a long moment, focusing intently on her task. "That perhaps it is time for me to continue my journey south. The roads are still passable, and I have imposed upon your kindness long enough." The thought of her leaving hit him with unexpected force. "Is that what you want? To leave Darnhelm?" "What I want—" She stopped, setting down her cutting knife to look at him directly. "What I want is little bearing on what is wise or proper. I am a peasant woman with no family, no dowry, no connections to recommend me. You are a lord with responsibilities to your people and your position. The gap between us is not one that can be bridged by good intentions alone. Perhaps the gap is not as wide as you think," Alric said carefully. Something flickered in her green eyes, hope perhaps quickly suppressed. "My lord, I would not want to misunderstand your meaning." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the courtyard. Sir Marcus's voice could be heard calling orders to the stable lads, suggesting visitors of some importance had arrived. Alric felt a moment's irritation at the interruption, but duty called, as it always did. "We should continue this conversation later," he said, though part of him wondered if the moment, once lost, could ever be recaptured. The visitors proved to be Lord Garrett's steward and a small escort, bearing news that chilled Alric's blood. Lord Garrett of Millhaven and his family had been confirmed dead, their holding burned, and their people scattered by raiders who had struck in the night and vanished like smoke. The king's men found evidence that it was not mere banditry, the steward reported, his voice heavy with grief and exhaustion. This was planned, executed by those who knew the family's movements and defenses. Lord Garrett's enemies finally had their revenge. His daughter? Alric asked, remembering the young woman he had met at court years earlier. Was Lady Lyra's body found among? He stopped, the name hitting him like a physical blow. Lady Lira of Millhaven. The intelligent eyes, the natural grace despite her humble clothes, the careful way she had spoken of her lost family. "No trace of her was found, my lord. It is hoped she escaped, but—" The steward shrugged helplessly. A young woman alone on the roads in such times. Alric's mind raced as pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The healer's hands that bore no true calluses of hard labor. The careful speech that occasionally revealed an education beyond what a peasant might possess. The wooden cross she wore, not the rough carving a village craftsman might make, but something finer, older, passed down through generations of noble blood. When the steward and his men had been fed and given rooms for the night, Alric sought out Lira in the small chamber she had been given near the kitchens. She was sitting by her window, mending a tear in her only decent dress, but her needle had gone still in her hands. "How long have you known that I knew?" she asked, without looking up. "I suspected when the steward spoke your name. I am certain now, seeing your face." Alric closed the door behind him and leaned against it, studying this woman who had hidden in plain sight. Lady Lira of Millhaven, daughter of Lord Garrett. A noblewoman playing at being a peasant healer. "Not playing," she said firmly, finally meeting his eyes. "The healing is real. It was my grandmother's gift, passed to my mother, passed to me. But yes, I am noble-born, though that birthright died with my family and my home." "Why the deception?" Her laugh was bitter. "What deception?" "I told you I had lost my family, that I was alone. I told you I was a healer traveling south. All of this was true." She set aside her mending and stood, her bearing unconsciously shifting to something more regal despite her simple clothes. "I did not tell you I was once called my lady, because that woman died the night my home burned. The woman you took in, the one who tends your people, she is who I am now. And if I had known your true birth, would you have allowed me to offer you charity as I would any common refugee?" "No," she admitted. "I would have tried to negotiate some formal arrangement, some alliance that would benefit us both. I would have been Lady Lira, not simply Lira. And you—" She looked at him with an expression that was suddenly vulnerable. "You would have seen a political opportunity, not a person. Everything between us would have been calculated, measured against advantage and position. Understanding dawned with the force of revelation. You wanted to be valued for yourself. not for your bloodline or your potential usefulness. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. For 5 years, I have been nothing but a strategic piece in other men's games. When I collapsed at your gates, when I woke to find genuine kindness offered, without condition, it was the first time since my parents died that someone saw me as simply human. Alric moved closer, drawn by the pain in her voice and the courage it had taken to be so honest. And now? Now that we both know the truth, now everything changes, she said sadly. Now you must decide whether the woman you have come to know still exists, or if she was merely an illusion created by circumstances. She exists, he said firmly. Noble blood does not change the gentleness of your hands or the wisdom of your words. It does not alter the way you listen to old Henric's stories or the skill with which you healed young Timothy. If anything, it makes your choices more remarkable. You could have demanded service, yet you chose to serve. Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in winter wind. And the complications this knowledge brings? The rumors Lord Cedric mentioned will seem mild compared to what people will say when they learn you harbor the lost heir of Millhaven. Let them talk, Alric said, surprised by his own certainty. We will face whatever comes together. If you are willing. The hope in her eyes blazed brighter, and for the first time since learning her true identity, Alric allowed himself to imagine a future where duty and desire might walk hand in hand. The knowledge of Lyra's true identity changed everything and nothing at the same time. She remained the same gentle healer who brought comfort to his people. But now Alric understood the quiet dignity he had always sensed in her bearing. She was noble not by accident of birth alone, but by the choices she made each day choosing. Service over superiority, compassion over calculation. 3 days after their revelation, a crisis tested both their growing bond and Lyra's skills as a healer. A merchant's wagon had overturned on the treacherous mountain road leading to Darnhelm, and the injured travelers were brought to the castle in desperate need of care. Among them was a young mother whose leg had been crushed beneath the wagons. Wait, her small daughter weeping beside her. Alric found Lira in the castle's makeshift infirmary, her sleeves rolled back and her hands steady despite the gravity of the woman's injuries. She had transformed one of the unused chambers into a place of healing, with clean linens, boiled water, and her carefully organized collection of herbs and implements. How severe is it? He asked quietly, not wanting to disturb her concentration. The bone is shattered, but if I can set it properly and prevent the poison that often follows such wounds. She looked up at him, and he saw both determination and fear in her green eyes. I need your help, Alric. This is beyond what I can manage. Alone. Hearing his name spoken so intimately, without title or formality, sent warmth through his chest. Tell me what to do. For the next several hours, they worked together with an intimacy born of shared purpose. Alric held the patient steady while Lyra set the broken bone with skill that would have impressed the finest court physicians. They moved around each other with an ease that spoke of perfect partnership, anticipating each other's needs without words. There, Lira finally whispered, securing the last of the splinting. The bone is properly aligned. Now we pray that infection does not set in. The young mother's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on their faces. My daughter, is she? Safe and unharmed, Alric assured her. She's with old Nan in the kitchens, no doubt being thoroughly spoiled with honey cakes and stories. Thank you, the woman breathed. Both of you. I thought when I saw the wheel coming down, do not think of such things now, Lira said gently, checking the woman's pulse with practiced fingers. You need rest and healing. Your daughter needs her mother whole and well. As they cleaned their hands in the basin of warm water, Alric marveled at what they had accomplished together. Where did you learn to set bones with such skill? That was not simple herb craft. My grandmother again, Lira replied, but there was something else in her expression, now a deeper truth waiting to be shared. She was more than a healer, Alric. She was noble-born herself, married to a lord who died young in battle. When she returned to her father's house, she brought with her all the learning she had gathered, not just from court physicians, but from hedge witches and wise women who understood arts that learned men dismissed. They walked together toward his chambers, the castle quiet around them in the deep hours of night. At his door, they paused, both aware that something had shifted between them during their shared work. "You are magnificent tonight," Alric said softly. "Watching you work, it was like watching someone fulfill their deepest purpose." "We were magnificent," Lira corrected. "I could not have managed alone. Your hands were as steady as any surgeon's. Your presence as calming as any priest's." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. Alric reached up without conscious thought, touching the gold chain at his throat where Alara's wedding ring had rested for 5 years. The familiar weight was gone. He had removed it 3 days ago, after learning who Lira truly was, though he had not consciously decided to do so. "Alric," Lira whispered, her voice carrying a question he was not sure either of them was ready to answer. "I know," he replied, understanding flooding between them without need for words. "I know what this means, what it could mean. But Lira," he cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin and the way she leaned into his touch. "I need you to know that what I feel has nothing to do with political advantage or strategic alliance. If you were still the nameless peasant I thought you were, if you had no claim to lands or titles, my heart would be just as surely yours." "And I need you to know," she replied, her hands coming up to cover his, "that I would choose you if you were a simple farmer with nothing but a cottage and a vegetable garden. What lives between us exists beyond questions of rank or station." He kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded with equal fervor. It was a kiss that spoke of recognition and promise, of two souls that had found their match despite all the obstacles that should have kept them apart. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and Lyra's cheeks were flushed with color that had nothing to do with fever or exertion. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now we face whatever consequences come from following our hearts instead of convention," Alric replied, "and we trust that love built on true partnership can weather any storm." The next morning brought news that tested that resolve sooner than either had expected. Sir Marcus appeared at breakfast with a carefully neutral expression that Alric had learned to recognize as diplomatic trouble. "My lord, Lady Rosalind of Thornfield has sent word that she will arrive this afternoon for a visit. She brings a small retinue and expects to stay for several days." Alric set down his cup with deliberate care. Lady Rosalind was a widow of good family and substantial holdings, and her interest in him as a potential husband had been made clear during their few previous encounters. Her timing, coming so soon after Lord Cedric's letter, was almost certainly not coincidental, I see. "And what reason does she give for this visit?" "She wishes to discuss a matter of mutual benefit to your holdings," Marcus replied diplomatically. "She also mentions looking forward to meeting the healer whose reputation has spread throughout the region." Across the table, Lyra's face had gone pale. "She wants to assess the competition," she said quietly. "There is no competition," Alric said firmly. "My heart is not a prize to be won through political maneuvering. Your heart, perhaps not, but your hand in marriage." Lira shook her head sadly. "She is everything I am not, Alric. Wealthy, well-connected, uncontroversial. From the perspective of statcraft, she would make you an ideal wife. And from the perspective of love?" Lyra's smile was tender but tinged with sadness. "From that perspective, she is not me. But love alone does not make a marriage wise, especially for a lord with responsibilities to his people." Before Alric could respond, The sound of hoofbeats in the courtyard announced that their trial by fire was about to begin. Lady Rosalind of Thornfield arrived with the pomp and circumstance befitting her station, a retinue of 20 mounted guards, 3 wagons of belongings, and the unmistakable air of a woman accustomed to having her desires fulfilled. She was, Alric admitted privately, everything that court society would deem a perfect match for him. Beautiful in a conventional way, with golden hair and blue eyes that missed little, wealthy enough to strengthen his holdings significantly, and possessed of the kind of refined manner that would smooth his path back into the kingdom's political circles. She was also, he realized within minutes of her arrival, everything that would slowly crush his spirit if he were foolish enough to marry her. "Lord Alric," she said warmly, extending a jeweled hand for him to kiss in greeting. "How wonderful to see you again, and how marvelous that you've recovered your spirits sufficiently to entertain guests once more." The subtle implication that his years of mourning had been an embarrassing withdrawal from civilized society was delivered with such smoothness that it might have seemed like genuine concern to anyone not listening carefully. "Lady Rosalind," he replied courteously, performing the expected ritual of greeting. "You honor Donhelm with your presence." "Such a charming holding," she said, her eyes taking in the ancient stones with the assessing gaze of someone mentally calculating their worth. "So rustic. It must be quite peaceful here, so far from the bustle of court life." Again, the double meaning was clear. Peaceful meant isolated. Rustic meant provincial. She was marking his territory as her own while appearing to compliment it. "I find great satisfaction in the quiet life," Alric replied carefully. "My people and my lands provide all the stimulation I require." "How admirably simple," Rosalind said, and there was no mistaking the condescension in her tone now. "Though I confess I've heard the most intriguing rumors about a healer you've taken in. Quite the charitable gesture, they say." Before Alric could respond, Lira appeared from the direction of the stables, leading a mare that had thrown a shoe on the morning ride. Her simple brown dress and practical manner could not have contrasted more sharply with Rosalind's elaborate traveling gown and careful presentation. "Ah," Rosalind said softly, her blue eyes sharpening with interest. "This must be the famous healer." "Lady Rosalind," Alric said formally. "May I present Lira of—" He caught himself, remembering that her true identity remained a carefully guarded secret. "Lira, who serves as healer to our household." "Lira, this is Lady Rosalind of Thornfield." Lira curtsied with perfect form, her natural grace evident despite her humble attire. "My lady, I hope your journey was pleasant, and that neither you nor your people have need of my services." "How thoughtful," Rosalind replied, her tone suggesting she found such consideration from a servant presumptuous. "I'm sure your skills are quite adequate for the simple ailments of country folk." The insult was delivered with such casual dismissal that it might have passed for mere conversation. But Alric saw the flash of anger in Lyra's green eyes before she mastered her expression. "I do my best to serve wherever I'm needed," Lira replied mildly. "If you'll excuse me, this mare requires attention before she goes lame." As Lira led the horse away, Alric found himself torn between admiration for her dignity and fury at Rosalind's casual cruelty. "Such dedication to her duties," Rosalind observed, watching Lyra's retreating form with calculating eyes. "Quite unusual to find such devotion in the lower classes." That evening at dinner, the contrast between the two women became even more pronounced. Lady Rosalind held court at the high table, regaling the assembled company with witty stories of court life and subtle reminders of her family's wealth and connections. She was undeniably charming when she chose to be, her conversation polished and her manners impeccable. But Alric found his attention constantly drawn to the lower tables, where Lira sat quietly among his people. She had changed from her work dress into her one good gown, still simple, still plainly cut, but clean and mended with careful attention to detail. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did contribute to the conversation, it was with genuine interest in others, rather than self-promotion. "Lord Alric," Rosalind said, drawing his attention back to her with practiced skill. "I hope you don't mind my speaking plainly, but I'm concerned about the talk your kindness to that woman has generated." "What manner of talk?" he asked, though he suspected he knew. "Nothing malicious, I'm sure, but you know how people gossip. A widowed lord showing such favor to an unmarried woman, regardless of her station, well, it creates speculation about your intentions." Rosalind's smile was sympathetic but firm. "As your friend, I felt obligated to warn you that such rumors could damage your reputation if allowed to continue. And what would you suggest I do about these rumors?" "Send her away, naturally. With generous compensation for her services, of course, and perhaps a letter of recommendation to help her find employment elsewhere. Then," she continued, leaning closer with a conspiratorial air, "you should consider taking a wife. Someone whose position would silence any whispers about your conduct and strengthen your standing with the king. Someone like yourself, perhaps," Alric asked dryly. "I would be honored to consider such an arrangement," Rosalind replied without a trace of embarrassment at his directness. "Our holdings complement each other perfectly. Our bloodlines are compatible, and I believe we could find contentment together." Contentment. The word fell between them like a stone into still water, creating ripples that reached far beyond its small splash. Contentment was what she offered, a practical arrangement devoid of passion, growth, or the kind of deep partnership he had begun to discover with Lira. "Your proposal honors me," he said carefully, "but I require time to consider such a momentous decision." "Of course," Rosalind agreed graciously. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Alric," her use of his given name was deliberately intimate, a claim of familiarity. "Some opportunities do not wait indefinitely for our convenience." Later that night, Alric found Lira in the herb garden despite the chill, tending to plants that would need protection from the coming frost. She worked by lamplight, her movements economical and sure, but he could sense the tension in her shoulders. "You heard her proposal," he said without preamble. The entire hall heard her proposal. Lira replied without looking up from her work. She was not particularly subtle in her approach. "And what do you think of her advice regarding you?" Lira's hands stilled on the plants she was covering with protective cloth. "I think she is not wrong about the rumors, or about the damage they might cause to your reputation. A lord who appears to favor his servants above his equals invites speculation and criticism. That's not what I asked." She straightened, finally meeting his eyes in the flickering lamplight. "What you asked is whether I think you should send me away to take a suitable wife. And the honest answer is, I don't know anymore, Alric. These past few days, loving you has felt like the most natural thing in the world. But seeing her here, seeing what she represents everything I don't want," he said firmly. "She represents everything you should want," Lira corrected sadly. "Security, respectability, political advancement. Children born without question of legitimacy. A wife who knows how to navigate court politics and strengthen your position in the kingdom. And what do you represent?" Lira's smile was soft but heartbreaking. "Complications. Scandal. The kind of love that asks you to choose between your heart and your duty." Alric moved closer, taking the cloth from her hands and setting it aside. "What if I told you that loving you feels more like duty than anything I've ever done? Not obligation, but the kind of deep responsibility that comes from recognizing your purpose in life. I would say that you're a romantic fool who's about to make enemies of powerful people for the sake of a woman with nothing to offer but her heart. And I would say that a woman who offers her heart offers everything." He cupped her face in his hands, feeling her tremble despite the warmth of his touch. Tomorrow I'll give Lady Rosalind my answer. But tonight, I want you to know that whatever comes, whatever price we pay for choosing each other, I regret nothing." He kissed her then with desperate tenderness, as if he could somehow imprint the moment on both their souls. When they broke apart, Lyra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever tomorrow brings, I want you to remember that I loved you completely, without reservation." "Tomorrow will bring what we make of it," he replied, "and we will make it together." But even as he spoke the words, both of them could feel the weight of approaching consequences, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon of their happiness. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor who would change everything. Brother Thomas, a traveling monk known throughout the region for his extensive knowledge of noble genealogies and his perfect memory for faces, arrived at Darnhelm's gates requesting shelter for the night. Old Nan served him breakfast in the great hall, where he could observe the castle's inhabitants going about their morning duties. Alric was discussing grain stores with his steward, when the monk's sharp intake of breath drew his attention. Brother Thomas was staring at Lira with an expression of profound shock, his weathered hands trembling slightly as they gripped his wooden cup. "Impossible," the monk whispered. "But the eyes, the bearing, it cannot be anyone else. Brother Thomas?" Alric approached the elderly man with concern. "Are you unwell?" "My lord," the monk said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "That young woman, the healer everyone speaks of, she is no peasant. I would stake my soul on it." A chill ran down Auric's spine. "What makes you say such a thing?" "Because I presided over her christening 25 years ago." Brother Thomas stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Lyra's form as she moved among the servants, checking on various small ailments. "Lady Lira of Millhaven, daughter of Lord Garrett, and Lady Elena. I blessed her as an infant, watched her grow into childhood. Those eyes, that particular shade of green, they are her grandmother's eyes, Lady Catherine's eyes. There is no mistaking them." The world seemed to tilt around Alric. He had known Lyra's true identity for days, but having it confirmed by an outside witness brought home the magnitude of what they both faced. "Brother, I must ask for your discretion." "Of course, my lord. But if I recognized her, others might as well." The monk's expression grew troubled. "There are those who would pay handsomely for word of her location. Lord Blackwood of Ravenshire, in particular, has been most eager to locate any surviving members of the Millhaven line." Blackwood? Auric's blood ran cold. Lord Blackwood was known throughout the region as a man of ruthless ambition who had profited greatly from the chaos following Lord Garrett's death. What interest would he have in? He claimed Millhaven lands as forfeit after the family's death, my lord. But if an heir survives, his claim becomes invalid under the king's law. Lady Lyra's existence threatens everything he has built on her. Family's grave. The implications crashed over Alric like a cold wave. Not only was Lira noble-born, but she was potentially one of the most hunted women in the kingdom, and he had been harboring her under his own roof. "How long before word reaches Blackwood that she lives?" he asked. "Hard to say, my lord. But secrets have a way of traveling faster than those who try to keep them." Brother Thomas glanced around the hall, noting how many servants had observed their conversation. "If I were you, I would prepare for visitors of a less welcome nature than Lady Rosalind." That afternoon, as Lady Rosalind prepared for her departure, having received Auric's polite but firm rejection of her marriage, Proposal Alric found himself facing a decision that would define the rest of his life. He could send Lira away, perhaps to a convent where she might find safety in anonymity, and preserve his own position by avoiding the political complications her presence would bring. Or he could stand with her against whatever storms were coming. He found her in the small chapel, kneeling before the simple wooden cross that served as the castle's altar. Her head was bowed in prayer, and something in her posture spoke of someone seeking strength for trials ahead. "Lira," he said softly. She looked up, and he saw that she had been weeping. Brother Thomas told me he recognized me. He was kind about it. But Alric, if he knew me, others will too. I have to leave before I bring destruction down on you and your people. No, he said firmly, moving to kneel beside her. We face this together. You don't understand what you're saying. Blackwood has claimed my family's lands, my father's title. My existence makes him a usurper in the eyes of the law. He will stop at nothing to ensure I disappear permanently. Then, we make sure you don't disappear. Alric took her hands in his, feeling their coldness despite the chapel's warmth. We make your survival public knowledge. We announce our betrothal and your true identity simultaneously. Once the entire kingdom knows you live and are under my protection, Blackwood cannot simply make you vanish without answering to the king himself. Lira stared at him in amazement. You would do that? Risk everything. Your safety, your position, your people's welfare for me. I would do that for love, he replied. But more than that, I would do it for justice. Your family deserves to be avenged, their true heir acknowledged. And if loving you is the path to that justice, then it is not a risk but a calling. The scandal will be enormous, she warned. A lord marrying his supposed servant, elevating a woman everyone believes to be a peasant to Duchess. The whispers will follow us for years. Let them whisper, Alric said with growing conviction. When they see how you rule beside me, how you care for our people and strengthen our lands, the whispers will turn to admiration. And if they don't, he shrugged. I find I care less about the opinion of courtiers than I once did. Lyra's tears were flowing freely now, but they were tears of relief rather than fear. Are you certain? Once we take this step, there will be no going back. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. He pulled her to her feet, holding her close in the sacred space where they had both sought guidance. Will you marry? Lady Lira of Millhaven? Will you help me build something worth defending against those who would destroy it? Yes, she whispered against his chest. Yes, with all my heart. That evening, Alric called his household together in the great hall. Sir Marcus, Old Nan, Father Benedict, and all the servants who had come to love their gentle healer gathered to hear what their lord had to say. At his side stood Lira, no longer hiding behind the role of servant but standing with the quiet dignity of her true station. My friends, Alric began, his voice carrying easily through the stone chamber. I have an announcement that will surprise many of you, though some may have already guessed its nature. The woman you know as Lira, our beloved healer, is not what she has seemed. A murmur ran through the assembled group, but it was a murmur of curiosity rather than condemnation. She is Lady Lira of Millhaven, daughter of Lord Garrett and rightful heir to the Millhaven lands currently held by usurpers. She came to us as a refugee from violence, seeking nothing but shelter and the chance to serve others with her healing gifts. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I have asked her to become my wife, not because of her noble blood, but because of her noble heart. She has honored me by accepting. The hall erupted in cheers and applause. Whatever the political implications might be, Alric's people had grown to love Lira for her kindness and skill, and they rejoiced in their lord's happiness. Old Nan was weeping openly with joy. Sir Marcus's weathered face bore a smile of deep satisfaction. Even Father Benedict, usually restrained in his emotions, was beaming as he contemplated the wedding ceremony he would soon perform. But as the celebration continued around them, both Alric and Lira were aware that they had just declared war on forces that would not accept their happiness without a fight. In the distance, ravens were already carrying word across the kingdom that the lost heir of Millhaven had been found and that Lord Blackwood's ill-gotten gains were now in jeopardy. The die was cast, and there would be no turning back from the path they had chosen together. News of Lord Blackwood's approach reached Darnhelm 3 days after Alric's announcement, carried by a merchant whose wagons had been questioned at length by armed men wearing Blackwood's colors. The merchant, grateful for past kindnesses from Donhelm's lord, had ridden hard through the night to bring warning. "They asked specifically about Lady Lira, my lord," the man reported, still breathing hard from his desperate journey. "Wanted to know if she was truly here, if the rumors of your betrothal were fact or fancy. When I said I knew nothing, they searched my wagons thoroughly, as if they expected to find her hidden among the grain sacks." Alric received this news in his solar, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. Sir Marcus stood at attention despite the early hour, his expression grim but determined. Father Benedict clutched his prayer book, though whether for comfort or preparation for last rites remained unclear. Old Nan had insisted on being present, claiming that anyone who threatened her lord and his lady-love would have to answer to her personally. "How many men does he bring?" Alric asked. 50, perhaps 60 armed riders, my lord. And they're not riding like men on a social visit. They mean business, and that business looks like war to these old eyes. Lira, who had been quietly listening from her place by the window, turned to face the group. In the 3 days since their betrothal announcement, she had undergone a transformation that still amazed Alric. Gone was any pretense of servitude or humility. In its place stood a woman who carried herself with the unconscious authority of noble birth, tempered by the wisdom gained through hardship. "He cannot simply attack the castle without provocation," she said thoughtfully. "Even Blackwood would not dare such open aggression against another lord without some legal justification." "What sort of justification might he claim?" Sir Marcus asked. "That I am an impostor, perhaps. That the real Lady Lira died with her family, and I am some clever peasant seeking to profit from resemblance." Her smile was bitter. "Or he might claim that I am his legal ward, since he holds my family's lands, and that Lord Alric has unlawfully harbored a runaway under his protection." Alric moved to stand beside her, his presence both protective and supportive. "What would you have done in your father's time? How would Lord Garrett have handled such a threat?" "My father was a scholar as well as a warrior," Lira replied. "He believed that the pen could be mightier than the sword, but only if backed by the will to use both when necessary." She looked around the room at the faces of those who had become her chosen family. "We need proof of my identity that even Blackwood cannot dispute, and we need allies who will support our claim." "Brother Thomas has already agreed to testify to your identity," Father Benedict offered. "His word carries weight throughout the kingdom." "One witness might not be enough," Sir Marcus observed pragmatically. "Blackwood will bring his own witnesses to swear that Lady Lira died 5 years ago." "Then we need more than witnesses," Alric said, an idea beginning to form. "Lira, you mentioned that your grandmother was noble-born. What family did she come from?" "The House of Ravencrest, my lord. She was Lady Catherine of Ravencrest before her marriage." Lyra's eyes began to brighten as she understood his thinking. "The Ravencrest family records would show her marriage to your grandfather, your mother's birth, and eventually your own christening," Alric finished. "Brother Thomas mentioned your grandmother's distinctive green eyes. If the family records describe that trait, then I have proof of bloodline that no amount of gold or threats can erase." Lira turned to Sir Marcus with new urgency. "How quickly could a fast rider reach Ravencrest Keep?" 2 days, my lady, if he rode hard and changed horses at Millbrook. "Send young Willem," Alric decided. "He's our fastest rider, and he has the wit to avoid Blackwood's patrols if necessary." He moved to his writing desk, pulling out parchment and ink. "I'll give him letters of introduction and explanation. If Lord Ravencrest is half the man his reputation suggests, he'll see the justice in our cause." As Willem prepared for his desperate mission, the rest of the castle began preparations of a different sort. Sir Marcus inspected the defenses with the eye of a man who had defended these walls before, checking every gate, every weak point, every store of arrows and oil that might be needed if diplomacy failed. Alric found himself in his father's old armory, lifting the ceremonial sword that had been presented to their house by the king's grandfather. The blade was still sharp, despite its age, its balance perfect in his hand. He had not worn a sword since his wedding day, but the weight of it felt right against his hip, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for, even unto death. "You're thinking of your father," Lira said from the doorway, having followed him to this quiet place. "I'm thinking of legacy," he replied, turning to face her. "Of what we pass down to those who come after us, and what we're willing to sacrifice to preserve what matters most." She moved to stand before him, reaching up, to trace the lines of worry that had appeared around his eyes in the past few days. "I never wanted to bring war to your peaceful castle." "You brought life to my castle," he corrected, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Everything else is just the price of defending that life." "The odds are not in our favor," she said quietly. 60 trained fighters against our handful of guards and whatever villagers might stand with us. Numbers are not everything in warfare, Alric replied, though he knew the mathematics of their situation as well as she did. "We have the advantage of defensive position, and we're fighting for something more important than gold or political ambition." "Love," she said softly. "Justice," he corrected. "Love is what brought us together, but justice is what will sustain us when the fighting begins. Your father's murder, your family's destruction, the theft of your birthright, all of it demands an accounting that only we can provide." That evening, as they shared what might be their last peaceful meal together, the great hall buzzed with quiet conversation and nervous energy. The servants who had initially welcomed Lira as a humble healer now understood that they served a woman whose courage had been tested by losses greater than any of them had imagined. Their loyalty, freely given, felt more precious than any oath. Sworn in the throne room, Old Man had prepared a feast worthy of the occasion: roasted fowl, fresh bread, preserved fruits that would normally have been saved for the harshest winter months. "If we're going to face whatever comes tomorrow," she declared, "we'll do it on full stomachs and with full hearts." Father Benedict offered a blessing over their meal that was half prayer and half battle hymn, asking for wisdom and counsel, courage in conflict, and mercy for their enemies. Though his tone suggested he expected to need more of the first two than the last dot as the evening wore on, and the castle settled into uneasy rest, Alric and Lira found themselves alone on the battlements, where they had shared so many quiet conversations. Below them, the village lights twinkled like scattered stars, each one representing a life that might be affected by the coming confrontation. "Do you regret it?" Lira asked suddenly, "choosing love over safety? You could still send me away, claim you were deceived about my identity. Blackwood might accept that and leave you in peace." "Never," Alric said firmly. "Even if I could convince myself to do such a thing, which I could not, it would solve nothing. Blackwood knows you live. Whether you're here or elsewhere, he'll hunt you until you're silenced permanently. At least here, you have people willing to stand with you. People who might die for a cause that isn't truly theirs. People who choose to stand for justice, which is everyone's cause." He pulled her close, feeling the tremor in her hands despite her outward calm. "Tomorrow we'll face whatever comes together. Tonight," he cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail in the moonlight. "Tonight I want to marry you." "Here? Now?" she whispered. "Here now, before God and whatever witnesses we can gather. If we're to face battle as husband and wife, let it be in truth as well as name." Within the hour, the castle's chapel was filled with everyone who called Darnhelm home. Father Benedict, his voice strong despite the circumstances, began the ancient words that would bind them together in the sight of God and their chosen family. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of the Almighty to witness the union of Alric, Lord of Darnhelm, and Lira, rightful lady of Millhaven, in holy matrimony. Alric had changed into his finest doublet, the deep blue fabric bringing out the intensity of his dark eyes. At his side hung his father's sword, a reminder that this ceremony took place under the shadow of coming conflict. Lira wore her one good gown, but old Nan had woven wildflowers from the castle garden into her hair, creating a crown worthy of any duchess. Do you, Alric, take this woman to be your wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? I do, Alric said, his voice carrying clearly through the small chapel. Before God and these witnesses, I pledge my heart, my sword, and my life to the defense and love of Lady Lira. And do you, Lira, take this man to be your wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? I do, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Before God and these witnesses, I pledge my heart, my healing hands, and my life to stand beside Lord Alric in whatever trials may come. The ring Alric placed on her finger was his mother's, a simple band of gold set with a single green stone that matched her eyes perfectly. As he slid it onto her hand, he whispered words meant for her alone. My heart, my Duchess, my partner in all things. When Father Benedict pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in cheers that echoed through the castle's ancient stones. For a moment, surrounded by the love and support of their people, it was possible to forget the approaching danger and simply rejoice in the miracle of two wounded souls finding wholeness in each other. But even as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, both were aware of the hoofbeats that echoed in the distance, the sound of Lord Blackwood's approach, and the test that would determine whether their love story would become legend or tragedy. Lord Blackwood arrived at dawn with the thunder of hoofbeats and the gleam of steel in the morning light. From the castle's battlements, Alric watched the column of mounted warriors arrange themselves in the courtyard below 60 men-at-arms in black and crimson, their weapons visible but not yet drawn. At their head rode Blackwood himself, a man whose reputation for ruthless ambition was matched only by his skill at finding legal justification for his cruelest acts. He was younger than Alric had expected, perhaps 40 years of age, with the kind of sharp-featured handsomeness that would have served him well at court. His armor was expensive but practical, and he sat his destrier with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way through a combination of charm, gold, and carefully applied violence. Lord Alric of Darnhelm, Blackwood called out, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. I come under the king's protection, seeking audience with you on a matter of mutual concern. Alric descended to the great hall, where Lira waited with Sir Marcus and Father Benedict. She had changed from her wedding gown into a dress of deep blue that emphasized her noble bearing, and around her throat she wore a pendant that had belonged to her grandmother, a silver rose that bore the Ravencrest arms, carefully preserved through years of hardship. Remember, Alric said quietly, taking her hand, you are Lady Lira of Millhaven, rightful heir to your father's lands and title. Let nothing he says make you doubt that truth. I remember who I am, she replied, her voice steady. The question is whether he will acknowledge it. They received Blackwood in the great hall with all the ceremony due his rank, though the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. He entered with only 2 companions, his captain of guards and a thin, scholarly man who was undoubtedly some form of legal advisor. Lord Blackwood, Alric said formally, remaining seated in his chair of state while Lira stood beside him. You honored Darnhelm with your presence, though I confess surprise at the size of your escort for a social visit. Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. Dangerous times require cautious measures, Lord Alric. I'm sure you understand. His gaze shifted to Lira, and something cold flickered in his dark eyes. And this lovely lady must be the woman who has caused such confusion throughout the region. This is my wife, Alric said firmly. Lady Lira of Darnhelm, formerly of Millhaven. Ah yes, the supposed lost heir. Blackwood's tone was conversational, but the words carried the weight of accusation. How remarkable that she should appear so conveniently, just when certain legal challenges to my administration of the Millhaven estates required resolution. There is nothing convenient about surviving the murder of one's family, Lira said quietly, her first words since Blackwood's arrival. Murder? Blackwood raised an eyebrow in apparent surprise. The official reports speak of raiders, bandits, driven by desperation. Tragic, certainly, but hardly murder in the legal sense. Raiders who knew exactly which rooms held the family's most valuable possessions, who struck on the one night when my father's guards were away on patrol. Lira's voice remained calm, but steel had entered her tone. Raiders who left no survivors except by the accident of my absence that night? Coincidences, perhaps. Or the invention of someone seeking to profit from tragedy. Blackwood gestured to his legal advisor, who stepped forward with a leather satchel. I have here sworn statements from 3 witnesses who can testify that Lady Lira of Millhaven died with her family 5 years ago. Her body was seen among the dead, properly identified and buried. Lies purchased with gold. Sir Marcus growled from his position behind Auric's chair. Careful words, Sir Knight, Blackwood warned. Accusations of perjury are serious matters. He returned his attention to Lira with predatory focus. If you are truly who you claim to be, you will have no difficulty proving your identity beyond doubt. From the leather satchel, his advisor produced a small object wrapped in silk. When unveiled, it revealed an ornate signet ring bearing the Millhaven arms, a silver tree on a field of green, with 3 stars above its branches. This ring belonged to Lord Garrett, Blackwood said smoothly. It was recovered from his body after the attack. According to family tradition, each heir receives a matching ring upon reaching majority. If you are truly his daughter, you will possess such a ring. Alric felt his heart sink. Lira had arrived at his gates with nothing but the clothes on her back and her wooden cross. If proof of identity depended on jewelry, she had never mentioned possessing, but Lira was already moving, her hand going to the small leather pouch she wore at her belt. From within, she drew out a ring that was clearly the mate to the one Blackwood held identical, in every detail except that hers showed the wear of recent use rather than the pristine condition of something recovered from a dead man's finger. My father gave me this on my 20th birthday, she said, sliding it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. 3 days before the attack that destroyed my family and my home. For the first time since his arrival, Blackwood's composure showed. Cracks. His eyes narrowed as he studied the ring, clearly looking for some sign of forgery or deception. Rings can be counterfeited, he said finally, but uncertainty had entered his voice. Can they? Father Benedict stepped forward, his elderly frame somehow commanding despite its lack of physical imposance. Then perhaps Lord Blackwood would care to explain how a counterfeit ring bears the same minute scratches and wear patterns as this. 1. He held up a detailed drawing, which I sketched when I blessed Lady Lira's christening 25 years ago at her father's specific request. Brother Thomas emerged from the shadows where he had been waiting, carrying a leather-bound book that was clearly ancient and valuable, and perhaps he would care to explain how a pretender would possess the distinctive green eyes that have marked the Ravencrest bloodline for 7 generations' eyes that I observed in her grandmother, Lady Catherine, and recorded in the family chronicles. The 2 religious men stood together, their combined testimony carrying the weight of unshakable moral authority. Blackwood's legal advisor whispered urgently in his lord's ear, but Blackwood waved him away with obvious irritation. "Even if this woman is who she claims to be," he said, his voice hardening, "she forfeited any claim to the Millhaven estates by abandoning them in their hour of need. A lord's heir who flees rather than to family holdings has no right to reclaim what was lost through cowardice." "I was 20 years old and alone," Lira replied with quiet dignity. "My family was dead, my guards scattered or slain. What would you have had me do? Throw myself on the swords of my family's killers to satisfy your notion of noble obligation? I would have had you trust in the king's justice, as I did when I petitioned to administrate your abandoned estates." Blackwood's mask was slipping now, revealing the calculating ambition beneath his courtly manner. "Instead, you chose to live as a vagabond, abandoning your responsibilities while others shouldered the burden of protecting your people." "Others?" Lira's voice rose for the first time. "You mean yourself, who has taxed my former tenants into poverty while selling their grain stores for personal profit, who has torn down cottages to expand hunting grounds and driven families from lands their ancestors worked for centuries. I have maintained order and prosperity. You have maintained your own wealth at the expense of those you were meant to protect." Lira stood straighter, every inch the noblewoman despite her simple dress. "And now you come here with armed men, seeking to silence the one person who can call you to account for your crimes." Blackwood's hand moved instinctively toward his sword hilt, and the tension in the hall became palpable. Sir Marcus and the castle guards shifted subtly into defensive positions, while Blackwood's men-at-arms tensed in response. "I came seeking justice," Blackwood said coldly. "If you refuse to submit to proper legal proceedings, and what?" Alric asked, finally speaking again. "You'll take her by force? Attack a fellow lord in his own hall? Attack a fellow lord in his own hall? I think even your gold cannot purchase justification for such actions." "Perhaps not," Blackwood admitted, his smile returning but lacking any warmth. "But accidents do happen, especially in these troubled times. Raiders strike without warning. Good people die defending their homes. Such tragedies are all too common." The threat hung in the air like the promise of storm, and everyone in the hall understood that they had moved beyond legal proceedings into something far more dangerous. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the tense standoff in the great hall, but these were different from Blackwood's thunderous arrival. These horses moved with the disciplined precision of royal messengers, their pace urgent but controlled. Through the tall windows, the flash of blue and gold banners could be seen, the colors of the king himself. "It seems," said a clear voice from the hall's entrance, "that we have arrived at a most opportune moment." Sir Geoffrey of Westbrook, the king's own herald, entered with the measured dignity of one who spoke with royal authority. Behind him came a small but impressive retinue, 2 knights of the royal guard, a scribe bearing the official seal, and most surprisingly, Lord Ravencrest himself, his silver hair and patrician bearing marking him immediately as Lyra's great uncle. "Your Majesty sends his greetings," Sir Geoffrey continued, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent hall, "and his interest in resolving certain irregularities that have come to the royal attention regarding the Millhaven succession." Blackwood's face had gone pale, but he managed to maintain his composure. "Sir Geoffrey, Lord Ravencrest, this is indeed an unexpected honor, though I confess confusion about what irregularities might require royal intervention. Perhaps these will clarify matters," Lord Ravencrest said, producing a scroll sealed with royal wax. A formal acknowledgment of Lady Lyra's identity and rightful claim to her father's estates, along with a royal pardon for any technical abandonment of her holdings, granted in recognition of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding her family's death. As Sir Geoffrey read the official proclamation aloud, Lyra felt the weight of 5 years lifting from her shoulders. The king's words, formal though they were, validated not just her identity, but her right to reclaim what had been stolen. from her. Furthermore, the herald continued, His Majesty has directed a full investigation into the administration of the Millhaven estates during Lady Lyra's absence, with particular attention to certain financial irregularities that have been brought to the royal attention. Blackwood's legal adviser whispered frantically in his master's ear, but Blackwood himself seemed to have aged a decade in as many minutes. The careful web of legal justifications he had woven around his seizure of the Millhaven lands was unraveling before his eyes. This is highly irregular, he protested weakly. Due process requires. Due process has been followed. Lord Ravencrest interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of one who had served at court for 40 years. Lady Lyra's identity has been verified through multiple sources, including church records, family archives, and the testimony of unimpeachable witnesses. Your own claims to her estates are hereby declared invalid. Moreover, Sir Geoffrey added with the satisfaction of a man delivering long-awaited justice, the king wishes to personally congratulate Lord Alric on his marriage to Lady Lyra, and to express his pleasure that two such noble houses should be united in bonds of love and mutual support. The transformation in the hall's atmosphere was immediate and profound. Blackwood's men-at-arms, who moments before had been prepared for violence, now found themselves facing not just a local lord and his small garrison, but the explicit will of the king himself. There would be no accidents today, no convenient raids to silence inconvenient witnesses. Lord Blackwood, Alric said formally, his voice carrying new authority as husband to a recognized heiress, I believe your business here is concluded, unless, of course, you wish to contest the king's judgment. Blackwood's remaining composure crumbled entirely. This is impossible. The expenses I have incurred in maintaining the estates, the improvements I have made, surely I am entitled to compensation. You are entitled to a fair accounting, Lord Ravencrest said coldly, which the king's investigators will provide in due course. Any legitimate expenses will be honored. Any irregularities will be dealt with according to royal justice. The threat was clear, and Blackwood was experienced enough in court politics to recognize defeat when it stared him in the face. He drew himself up with what dignity remained to him, though his hands trembled slightly as he straightened his sword belt. I see that I have been outmaneuvered, he said with bitter resignation. Very well. Lady Lyra. He turned to her with a bow that was technically correct but utterly without warmth. I congratulate you on your resourcefulness, and I wish you joy in reclaiming what was always rightfully yours. I take no joy in your downfall, Lord Blackwood, Lira replied with quiet dignity. I take joy only in justice served, and my people freed from oppression. Your people? Blackwood repeated, with something that might have been admiration or might have been contempt. Yes, I suppose they are that now. I wonder if you will find ruling easier than surviving. I will not rule alone, Lira said, moving to take Alric's arm. And I will rule with the welfare of my people always in mind, rather than my own enrichment. The barb found its mark, and Blackwood's jaw tightened. But he was beyond retaliation now, reduced to accepting his losses and retreating as gracefully as possible. Come, he said to his followers. We have a long journey ahead of us, and much to reconsider. As Blackwood and his retinue departed, the hall erupted in celebration. Sir Marcus was grinning like a man half his age. Old Nan was weeping with relief and joy, and Father Benedict was offering prayers of thanksgiving with obvious fervor. But it was Lord Ravencrest's approach that moved Lyra most deeply. The elderly nobleman studied her face with eyes that held decades of wisdom and sorrow. You have your grandmother's eyes, he said softly, and your father's courage. Catherine would be proud of the woman you have become. Thank you, Lyra whispered, tears flowing freely now. For coming, for believing, for acknowledging family, he finished gently. You are not alone in this world, child. House Ravencrest stands behind you, as does your husband's house and the king himself. Your future is bright indeed. That evening, as the royal messengers prepared to depart with news of the day's resolution, Alric and Lira found themselves once again on the castle battlements. But this time, they were not facing an uncertain future filled with threats and dangers. This time, they looked out over lands that were truly theirs, people who were truly safe, and a horizon bright with possibility. So, Alric said, pulling his wife close against the evening chill, "What does it feel like to be a duchess twice over?" "Like coming home," Lira replied, leaning into his warmth. "Not to a place, but to a purpose. We have so much work ahead of us. Use restoring the Millhaven lands, caring for people who have suffered under Blackwood's rule, building something worthy of the trust that has been placed in us." "We," Alric repeated with deep satisfaction. "I like the sound of that word on your lips." "We," she confirmed, turning to face him fully. "In all things, from this day forward. Partners in rule, partners in purpose, partners in the kind of love that changes the world." Their kiss tasted of hope and promise, of battles won and futures bright with possibility. And in the village below, their people saw the light from their lord's tower and knew that the long winter of uncertainty had finally given way to spring. 6 months had passed since Lord Blackwood's defeated departure from Darnhelm's gates, and spring had come to the combined holdings of Darnhelm and Millhaven with a glory that seemed to reflect the transformation in their rulers' hearts. Where once 2 separate castles had stood in isolation, now a thriving network of restored villages, rebuilt roads, and renewed hope connected the lands in bonds of mutual prosperity. Lira stood in the solar that had once been Alric's private retreat, studying the detailed maps spread across the oak table that now served as their shared workspace. The chamber itself had been transformed, Alara's faded tapestry had been carefully cleaned and rehung beside a new work that depicted the spring meadow in its current glory, both past and present honored in their proper places. The reports before her told a story of remarkable recovery. The village of Millbrook, once nearly abandoned under Blackwood's harsh taxation, now bustled with artisans and merchants drawn by fair laws and gentle governance. The mill that had stood empty for 3 years was grinding grain again, its wheel turned by waters that flowed clear and unobstructed since the removal of Blackwood's illegal fish weirs. The harvest projections looked promising, Alric said, entering the solar with his own armload of documents. At 32, he carried himself with new confidence, the hollow grief that had marked his features for so long replaced by the satisfaction of a man who had found his purpose. Sir Marcus reports that the field Sir Blackwood abandoned to expand his hunting grounds are responding well to proper care. "And the people?" Lira asked, though she already knew the answer from the reports of her regular visits to the restored villages. "Thriving," Alric replied with deep satisfaction. 3 new families have requested permission to settle in Millbrook, and the blacksmith in Oakenhaven has taken on 2 apprentices. When people know they'll be treated fairly and allowed to keep the fruits of their labor, they work with a will that no amount of taxation can inspire. Lira smiled, setting aside her quill to move to the window where spring sunlight streamed through glass that sparkled with recent cleaning. The view had changed remarkably, where once she had seen only the immediate castle grounds. Now she could observe the daily life of a community that had learned to hope again. In the courtyard below, young Timothy, whose cough had first brought her to Alric's attention, was teaching a group of village children the basics of animal care. At 15, he had grown strong and capable under the guidance of the castle's master of horse, and his easy way with both beasts and children marked him as someone who would serve their lands well in years to come. Old Nan had established herself as the unofficial mother of the entire holding, her kitchen now serving not just the castle's inhabitants, but any traveler who arrived in need of a warm meal and sound advice. Her influence extended far beyond cooking. Village women brought their troubles to her, and her practical wisdom had prevented more than one family crisis from escalating into something worse. The delegation from court will arrive next week, Alric said, joining Lira at the window and slipping his arms around her waist. Lord Chancellor Edmund wishes to review our administration personally, though I suspect his true purpose is to report back to the king on whether his faith in us was justified. And what will he find? Lira asked, leaning back against her husband's solid warmth. He'll find what we've built together, Alric replied. Justice tempered by mercy, authority exercised for the benefit of the governed, and prosperity shared, rather than hoarded. He'll also find, Lira said with gentle humor, a duchess who was once mistaken for a peasant, and a lord who chose love over convention. I suspect that will provide considerable entertainment for the court gossips. Let them gossip, Alric said, echoing his words from months before. Time has a way of turning scandal into legend, and legend into inspiration for others who dare to follow their hearts. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the solar door. Enter, Lira called, and was delighted to see Father Benedict accompanied by Brother Thomas, both men bearing expressions of barely contained excitement. My lady, my lord, Father Benedict began formally, then abandoned ceremony in favor of honest joy. We bring news that we believe will please you greatly. News? Alric asked, noting the official-looking document in Brother Thomas's hands. From the king himself, Brother Thomas replied, unfolding the parchment with reverent care. His Majesty has been so impressed by the reports of your joint governance that he wishes to establish your methods as a model for other holdings recovering from mismanagement or conflict. Lira felt a flutter of pride mixed with apprehension. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means, Father Benedict said with obvious satisfaction, that young lords and ladies will be sent to observe how you've rebuilt these lands, your approach to justice, your methods of taxation and land management, your integration of healing arts with governance. All of it will be studied and, God willing, replicated throughout the kingdom. Furthermore, Brother Thomas added, the king wishes to formally recognize the union of your houses with a new title. You are to be known as the Duke and Duchess of Millhaven-Darnholm, with authority over an expanded region that includes several smaller holdings that have requested to join your administration. The weight of this honor settled over them both, not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. What they had built from the ashes of their separate sorrows was to become a beacon for others struggling to create something beautiful from loss and hardship. There is more, Brother Thomas continued with a smile. The king also announces his intention to visit your lands personally next spring, to observe the results of your governance and to celebrate what he calls the most successful love match of the age. Lira laughed, the sound bright with joy and wonder. From a starving peasant at the castle gates to a duchess hosting the king himself, if someone had told me such a story a year ago, I would have thought them mad. If someone had told me a year ago that I would find happiness again, Alric replied, I would have thought the same. Yet here we are, proof that the most impossible dreams sometimes have a way of becoming reality. That evening, they walked together through the village that had grown up around Darnhelm's walls, accepting the greetings and good wishes of people who had come to see them not just as rulers, but as family. The miller's wife showed off her newest grandchild. The blacksmith presented a set of finely wrought horseshoes as a gift, and the village children ran alongside their path, chattering excitedly about the spring festival they were planning. As they returned to the castle, Lira paused at the gates where she had once collapsed in the snow, desperate and alone. The contrast between that moment and this one seemed almost too great to comprehend. Then she had been dying. Now she was vibrantly alive. Then she had been nameless and forgotten. Now she was beloved by hundreds who looked to her for guidance and care. Do you ever wonder, she asked Alric as they climbed the stairs to their shared chambers. "What would have happened if your guards had found me just a few minutes later? If I had died there in the snow before you could offer help?" "No," he replied firmly, "because it didn't happen that way. Whatever divine providence or simple chance brought you to my gates at that exact moment, I choose to see it as proof that some things are meant to be. Love like ours doesn't come by accident. It comes when two people are finally ready to recognize what they've been searching for all their lives." In their bedchamber, once his alone, now transformed by her presence into a space that truly felt like home, they found a new tapestry hanging opposite the restored one from Lira's time. This one depicted the castle not in the idealized spring of memory, but as it was now, full of life, surrounded by thriving communities, connected to the world beyond its walls by bonds of trade, friendship, and mutual support. Old Nan had commissioned it from the finest weavers in the region, her gift to the lord and lady who had given her people back their hope. Worked into its borders were symbols of healing, herbs and flowers that only those who knew Lira's story would recognize as significant. And at its center, barely visible unless one looked closely, two figures stood hand in hand on the battlements, looking out over a kingdom bright with possibility. "She captures us well," Lira said softly, studying their woven likenesses. "She captures what we've built together," Alric corrected. "The us that exists not just as husband and wife, but as partners in something larger than either of us could have achieved alone." As they prepared for sleep, both were conscious that they stood at another threshold. The challenges of the past year had been met and conquered. The future stretched ahead bright with promise and purpose. There would be new trials. There always were, but they would face them together, with the strength that came from love tested by adversity and proven stronger than any force that might oppose it. The last thing Lira saw before sleep claimed her was the moonlight streaming through their window, illuminating the face of the man who had seen past her humble circumstances to the woman beneath, who had chosen her when choosing her meant risking everything he held dear. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new opportunities to serve the people who depended on them, new chances to prove that love and justice could indeed walk hand in hand. But tonight, in the castle that had once echoed with loneliness, but now rang with laughter and purpose, the Duke and Duchess of Millhaven-Darnhelm slept peacefully, surrounded by the tangible proof that the greatest acts of love truly do begin with a single moment of compassion, and that such moments, when nurtured with courage and commitment, can indeed change the world.